John Lennon pulled Yoko on stage unexpectedly. What she did made him cry during performance December 8, 1980. The Beacon Theater, New York City. John Lennon was supposed to be dead in 6 hours, but at that moment, under the blazing stage lights, with 2,800 people hanging on his every word, he was more alive than he'd been in years. The comeback tour that nobody saw coming. The performance that would change everything we thought we knew about John and Yoko's final days. What happened on that stage wasn't supposed to happen. The song Yoko sang wasn't supposed to exist, and the tears that followed, those tears carried a secret that the world has never heard. Until now. The audience had no idea they were witnessing history. They thought they were just seeing John Lennon's return to live performance after 5 years of silence. They had no clue that hidden in the shadows, watching from the wings, stood a woman carrying the weight of a prophecy. A prophecy that would come true before the sun rose again. It was bitter cold that December night in Manhattan. Snow threatened the sky. The city buzzed with anticipation because John Lennon was finally back. The reclusive Beatle had emerged from his Dakota-building cocoon for what everyone believed would be his triumphant return to the spotlight. But this wasn't triumph. This was goodbye. The Beacon Theater's red velvet seats were filled with celebrities, music executives, and devoted fans who had paid astronomical prices for tickets. Bob Dylan sat in the third row. Mick Jagger whispered to David Bowie in the VIP section. Everyone who mattered in the music world was there. Everyone except the one person who mattered most. Yoko Ono was supposed to be home with Sean. The 5-year-old was battling a fever, and she'd insisted on staying behind. But at 8:47 p.m., just as John was finishing Woman, something made her change her mind. Call it intuition. Call it destiny. Call it a wife's desperate need to be with her husband one last time. She arrived at the venue in a black limousine, her face pale as winter snow. Security tried to stop her, but she pushed past them with an urgency that frightened everyone around her. She burst through the backstage doors just as John was transitioning into his acoustic set. "Something's wrong," she whispered to the stage manager. "Something's terribly wrong. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like. That helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. Yoko Ono had always been an enigma. The woman who broke up the Beatles. The artist who screamed instead of sang. The widow who guarded John's legacy like a dragon guards treasure. But on December 8, 1980, she was something else entirely. She was terrified. Backstage at the Beacon Theater, crew members watched as she paced frantically in the narrow corridors. Her usually perfect black hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her hands shook as she clutched a piece of paper, a letter that none of them could see, but all of them would remember. "Where is he?" she asked anyone who would listen. "Where is John?" The stage manager, a gruff New Yorker named Tommy Castellano, tried to calm her down. "Mrs. Lennon, John's in the middle of his set. He's performing beautifully out there. The crowd loves him." But Yoko wasn't listening to the crowd. She was listening to something else. Something that made her skin crawl, and her heart race with a terror she couldn't name. "I need to see him," she insisted. "I need to be with him. Now." Through the curtains they could hear John's voice, clear and strong, singing "Jealous Guy" with an invulnerability that brought tears to the audience's eyes. It was supposed to be his moment, his night, his return to glory. But Yoko knew better. She knew it was ending. The letter in her hands, the one she'd received that morning, contained words that had haunted her all day. Words from a psychic in Los Angeles who had never met her, never spoken to her, but somehow knew. The music stops at midnight, the letter read. The dreamer awakens. And love becomes eternal. At first, she dismissed it as fan mail from another crazy person. But as the day progressed, as small things went wrong, Sean's fever, John's nervousness, the strange phone calls from blocked numbers, the words began to feel less like nonsense and more like warning. Now, standing in the dim backstage area of the Beacon Theater, listening to her husband sing about jealousy and regret, Yoko Ono understood with crystal clarity that she was running out of time. Tommy Castellano studied her face. In 30 years of working concerts, he'd learned to read people, and what he saw in Yoko's eyes wasn't stage fright or artistic temperament. It was premonition. "Mrs. Lennon," he said gently, "what's really going on?" Yoko looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. "He's going to need me out there," she whispered. "He's going to need me more than he's ever needed anyone." John Lennon stood alone on the Beacon Theater stage, his Gibson acoustic guitar catching the spotlight's glare. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the December cold that seeped through the old theater's walls. He was nervous, more nervous than he'd been since the Cavern Club days. 5 years away from the stage had done something to him, made him forget the rhythm of performance, the electric connection between artist and audience. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight felt final. "This next song," John said into the microphone, his Liverpool accent still thick after decades in America, "is for anyone who's ever loved someone so much it scared them." The audience leaned forward. This was why they'd come, for moments like this, for John Lennon's raw honesty wrapped in melody. He began playing the opening chords to Woman, the song he'd written for Yoko, the song that would become their anthem. But as he sang, his eyes kept drifting to the wings, searching for something, someone. "Woman, I can hardly express my mixed emotions at my thoughtlessness." Halfway through the second verse, he saw her. Yoko stood in the shadows, her black outfit making her nearly invisible except for her face, which caught the stage lights like pale marble. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be home with Sean, nursing their sick child back to health. But there she was, and something about her presence made John's heart skip a beat, not with joy, with dread. He finished Woman to thunderous applause, but his mind was elsewhere. Why was she here? What had driven her from their son's bedside to this theater on this night? "Ladies and gentlemen," John said suddenly, surprising even himself. The words came out before he could stop them. "I'd like to invite someone very special to join me up here." The audience stirred with excitement. Was Paul McCartney in the house? George Harrison? Ringo? My wife? My partner? My inspiration? Yoko Ono. The reaction was mixed. Some applauded enthusiastically. Others sat in polite confusion. Yoko's reputation as a performer was complicated. Her experimental style didn't always translate to mainstream audiences, but John didn't care about the audience anymore. He only cared about the woman in black, who was walking toward him with tears in her eyes. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said as she reached the microphone, her voice barely audible. "But here you are," John replied, taking her hand. "Here you are." What happened next would be debated by music historians for decades. Some would call it genius, others would call it madness, but everyone who witnessed it would call it unforgettable. "I need to tell them something," Yoko whispered to John, so quietly that the microphone couldn't pick it up. "Tell them what?" "The truth." The Beacon Theater held its collective breath. Yoko Ono stood at center stage, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the space, yet somehow commanding every eye in the house. John had moved to the piano, his hands poised over the keys, waiting for her signal. But she wasn't looking at the audience. She was looking at him. "John," she said into the microphone, her voice steady now, stronger than anyone had heard it in years. "Do you remember the song I wrote in the hospital?" A chill ran through the theater. Not from the December cold, but from something else. Something in her tone that made everyone lean forward, straining to hear. John's face went pale. "Yoko, that's not—" "It's time," she interrupted. "It's time for them to hear it." The song she was referring to didn't exist in any official capacity. No record label knew about it. No producer had heard it. It had been written 6 months earlier, during a hospital stay that the public never knew about. A stay that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with fear. Fear of losing each other. The song was called Last Light, and it was about endings, about the moment when love transcends mortality, about saying goodbye when you don't know you're saying goodbye. "I can't," John whispered, but the microphone caught it anyway. "You have to," Yoko replied. "They have to know what love really sounds like." And so, on December 8, 1980, at 9:23 p.m., 6 hours and 37 minutes before Mark David Chapman would end John Lennon's life, Yoko Ono began to sing the song that would haunt everyone who heard it. Her voice started low, almost speaking the words rather than singing them. "In the last light of evening, when shadows grow long, I memorize your face like it's the last song." John's piano joined her, delicate and heartbreaking. The melody was unlike anything he'd ever written, minor keys that seemed to echo with prophecy. "If tomorrow never comes, if tonight is all we have, I want you to remember how we loved beyond the past." The audience was mesmerized. Even those who had never appreciated Yoko's avant-garde style found themselves captivated by the raw emotion in her voice. This wasn't performance art. This wasn't experimental noise. This was a woman singing her heart out to the man she loved, as if her life depended on it, as if his life depended on it. "Hold me like the last light. Love me like the first day. Promise me that somewhere, somehow, we'll find our way." John's eyes filled with tears. Not just moisture, but the kind of tears that come from the deepest part of the soul. The kind that can't be controlled or hidden. He knew this song wasn't really about love. It was about goodbye. The Beacon Theater had never been this quiet during a performance. 2,800 people sat in absolute silence as Yoko's voice soared through the final verse of Last Light. John's piano had become more complex, more urgent, as if he was trying to pour a lifetime of music into these fleeting moments. "When the last light fades away and you can't find me here, look for me in every song, in every falling tear." But it was what happened next that broke John Lennon completely. Yoko reached into her jacket and pulled out the letter from the psychic in Los Angeles. Without breaking the melody, without missing a beat, she began to read it aloud, turning the stranger's words into lyrics. "The music stops at midnight. The dreamer must awaken. But love becomes eternal, never to be taken." John's hands froze above the piano keys. The blood drained from his face as he realized what she was singing. Words that weren't his, weren't hers. Words from someone who claimed to see the future. "Yoko," he whispered, but she kept singing. "In Dakota's shadow, where the lonely sidewalk ends, a stranger waits with darkness, but love transcends." The audience didn't understand the specific references, but they could feel the weight of something massive happening on that stage. Bob Dylan was crying. David Bowie had his hand over his mouth in shock. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was ritual. This was prophecy. This was goodbye. John stood up from the piano bench, tears streaming down his face. He walked to Yoko and took the microphone from her hands. "I don't want to say goodbye," he said, his voice breaking. "Not to you. Not to any of this." "You don't have to," Yoko replied, her voice still steady, still strong. "Love doesn't end, John. Love just changes form." The theater was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. What they were witnessing wasn't supposed to happen, wasn't supposed to be shared with strangers. This was too intimate, too raw, too real, but it was happening anyway. John pulled Yoko close and kissed her forehead. "If something happens to me, when something happens to you," she corrected. "When? Take care of Sean. Take care of the music. Take care of the love we made." "I will," she promised. "I will." They stood there holding each other as the audience watched, transfixed by the most honest moment they've ever witnessed on any stage. Love in its purest form. Love in the face of ending. Love that knew it was running out of time. What followed would be remembered as the most emotionally devastating concert finale in rock history. John and Yoko, still embracing center stage, began to sing together. Not Last Light anymore, but something spontaneous, something created in that moment from pure emotion and desperate love. Imagine there's no tomorrow, nothing left to lose or gain. Imagine there's just this moment, love shining through the pain. John's voice, weathered by years and cigarettes, blended with Yoko's ethereal tone to create something that transcended music. The audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were witnessing. They were part of something that felt sacred. Tommy Castellano, the gruff stage manager, stood in the wings with tears streaming down his face. "In 30 years, he would tell reporters later, I never saw anything like it. It was like they were saying goodbye to the world." The improvised song continued for nearly 10 minutes. No verses or choruses, just pure emotional expression, flowing between two people who loved each other more than life itself. "If I could stop time, I'd stop it right here, with your hand in mine and your heart so near." In the audience, people began to realize they were watching something unprecedented. Cell phones didn't exist yet, but those who had small recording devices turned them on instinctively, knowing they needed to capture this moment. Most of the recordings would be confiscated later. By whom, no one ever learned. As the improvised song came to an end, John walked to the edge of the stage. His final words to a live audience would be these: "Love is all you need." But sometimes love isn't enough to keep us safe. Sometimes love just makes us brave enough to say goodbye. He turned to Yoko. "Thank you for being my partner in everything. In music, in madness, in magic. Thank you for showing me what it means to love someone more than yourself," she replied. They walked off stage together, hand in hand, leaving behind an audience that sat in stunned silence for nearly 5 minutes before anyone thought to applaud. The official concert had ended at 10:47 p.m. John Lennon had 1 hour and 13 minutes left to live. December 9th, 1980, 12:01 a.m. The Dakota Building's courtyard was quiet, except for the sound of falling snow. John and Yoko had returned home from the Beacon Theater just 20 minutes earlier, both emotionally drained from the most intense performance of their lives. They stood in their apartment, looking out at Central Park, not speaking. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered had been said on stage. "I should check on Sean," Yoko whispered. "In a minute," John replied, pulling her close. "Just let me hold you for one more minute." They stood there in the darkness, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. The music of 15 years together. The music of a love story that had captivated and divided the world. At 12:05 a.m., Yoko pulled away. "I need to get some air. Will you come with me?" John nodded. "Always." They rode the elevator down to the lobby in silence. The doorman, Jose, smiled and nodded as they passed. It was the last time he would see John Lennon alive. Outside, the December air was crisp and clean. Snow continued to fall, covering the city in pristine white. They walked toward the street entrance, talking quietly about Sean, about the concert, about tomorrow's plans. They never noticed the man standing in the shadows. Mark David Chapman had been waiting for hours. In his pocket was a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. In his mind was a twisted logic that would rob the world of its greatest dreamer. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. 5 gunshots. John falling, Yoko screaming, the snow turning red. But here's what the world never knew about those final moments. As John lay dying on the Dakota's pavement, as Yoko knelt beside him screaming for help, as sirens wailed in the distance, he whispered something to her. Something that only she heard. Something that gave her the strength to survive the impossible loss that followed. "The music doesn't stop," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The music just changes stations." John Lennon was pronounced dead at 11:07 p.m. on December 8, 1980. But his final performance, that impossible, beautiful, prophetic goodbye at the Beacon Theater, was never officially recorded. The tapes disappeared. The witnesses were asked to sign agreements. The concert that saved John's soul was erased from official history, except for one thing. Yoko kept the letter from the psychic in Los Angeles. And 30 years later, she would reveal that it contained one more line. A line she never shared with anyone, not even John. Tell him that love transcends time, space, and even death itself. Tell him that every song he ever wrote was just practice for the song he'll write in eternity. The letter was signed with 2 words, "Love, John," posted 3 days after his death, from an address that didn't exist. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some love stories are too powerful for logic. And sometimes, the most incredible performances happen when we think no one is recording. But the universe is always recording. And love is the only song that never ends. What really happened at the Beacon Theater that night? Was it coincidence? Was it prophecy? Or was it something else entirely? The truth may be stranger than fiction and more beautiful than we dare to imagine. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, love is all you need, but sometimes love is all you have left.